things that happened when I was a student here. Bill mentioned, we've all done a lot of rotten sins. I've been with Bill when he's done a lot of those rotten sins. That's part of the reason I chose that hymn for us to sing today. You know, the definition of an optimist is a person who plays a trumpet and carries a pager. It'll take a moment for you to... Just a joke, Bill. It's just a joke. Having a little fun with me. I remember one cold winter morning back when Dr. Walford was president, and we had a few Saturday morning classes, and one of my Saturday morning classes was taught by S. Lewis Johnson, Dr. S. Lewis Johnson, now gone, and taught a lot of us on the platform Greek, and for some of us it was more of a challenge for him than for others. And I happened to be walking along as he was making his way to the class. He hated cold weather, had a big heavy black coat on, a hat on, and he's from Carolinas, and so this kind of cold weather for him was unusual. And he said, I said, "Good morning, Dr. Johnson." He said, "All right." I said, "How are you?" "Not well." "You know the problem with this school, Chuck?" I said, "No, sir." "Run by a bunch of Yankees." Bunch of Yankees have class on days this cold. I'm so excited about this new year, I can hardly stand it. I have to tell you. It's always amazing to me that people are bored. There are folks that are actually bored in life. Like a fellow named Lawrence Walters from San Pedro, California. Let me tell you about Lawrence. He said one day, "Enough is enough. What I need is a little adventure. Tired of just sitting around." So on the 2nd of July that year, he rigged up 42 helium-filled weather balloons, tied them to a Sears lawn chair, and lifted off. It's a true story. Armed with only a pellet gun to help handle the elevation issues. Before he knew it, he was shocked to realize he was 16,000 feet high. Walters sort of had his breath taken away about that level. Mine started getting a little fuzzy. He wasn't the only one surprised. Pilot in a Southwest airline radioed the tower and said, "Some guy is in a lawn chair floating across the sky." Thankfully, Walters had enough presence of mind to start shooting out the balloons, which allowed him to land about 45 minutes later in Long Beach. But that bizarre experience got him on a Tonight Show and a Timex watch and a Timex ad, and ultimately the guy had to quit his job as he went on the road to deliver motivational speeches. That is how hard up we are for motivational speakers. So why in the world did you do that? Was the common question everybody asked him. He says, "People ask me that a lot. They want to know if I had a death wish or something." And he said, I just told him, no, I just had to do something. I couldn't just keep sitting there. The guy's a nut. You imagine people just sitting there. You can't and I can't. What a terrible way to spend a year, just sitting around, just wondering and waiting for something to happen. With years unfolding like these years, the best years of our lives, and the best is yet to come. We just sang about it. Now, how exciting is it that we can walk into 12 new months. Well, half of it's already gone. So 11 and a half of the months now that are unrolling in front of us, which I want to talk to you about. And I want to warn you too, before we get into these months very far, that there are dangers lurking. A couple or three of them that came to my mind as I put my thoughts together. There's a danger of our walking in the flesh instead of the spirit, and suffering the consequences, not walking by faith, but walking by sight, which fills our lives with worry, stupid worries. Then there's a danger of planning every detail, right down to the gnat's whisker, and forgetting the most important part of all, and that's praying for direction as we walk into these 11 and a half months that remain. And the danger of running ahead of God rather than waiting for Him to open doors and to make the path straight and to clear the obstacles instead of our trying to move them out of the way ourselves. And that constant battle everybody has with worry. Chances are good your worry list is longer than your prayer list. You're all worried about some big thing on the horizon, and it's a very real probability it'll never happen. My worst worries and fears never realized throughout my life. And of course, the greatest of all the worries is the worry regarding when our last day will come. That's a serious issue. Of course it is. Peter Marshall, while he was chaplain of the Senate during the days of the Second World War, loved to tell the story. It was an old legend of a merchant in Baghdad who one day sent his servant to the market. And before very long, the servant came back white and trembling, and he said to his master, "Down at the marketplace, I was jostled by a woman in the crowd. And when she turned and looked at me, I looked right in the face of death. Death jostled me. She made a threatening gesture. And he said, 'Master, please lend me your horse. I must hasten to avoid her. And I will ride to Samaria, and there death will not find me.' Of course, the master lent him his horse, and he galloped away. And that afternoon, the same master made his way into the market, ran into the same old woman, walked up to her and said, 'Why did you frighten my servant this morning? Why did you make that threatening gesture?' Her response was, 'That was not a threatening gesture.' Death said, 'It was only a start of surprise. I was astonished to see him here in Baghdad. You see, I have an appointment with him tonight in Samaria.'" We serve a God who has put our lives together start to finish. He's not finding things out along the way. You'll never hear a gasp coming from heaven. Wow. I didn't know that. It's planned for us. Our times are in His hands. And some of you are learning that better than others. I have a few timely reminders for you in taking on the new year. They're all based on three simple statements found in James chapter 4. If you brought a testament with you, turn to it as Dr. Toussaint turns to his Greek text to check it out. Good for him. He's in our church. I look at him every Sunday, and I just thank God for things like patience on his part and a willingness to listen to me, who was once his student. Talk about an amazing turn of events. Remarkable, he even shows up. So here we are looking at the next few months, and we read in verse 13 of James 4, "Come on now, you who say Today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and we'll spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet, look closely, students, faculty members, friends of the seminary. You do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You're just a vapor that appears for a little while and vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live. And then we will do this or that. Love this passage of Scripture. Love it. Preach on it every new year. Whoever's from Stonebriar Church, you heard me bring his talk a few Sundays ago. It's a great reminder, not just at the beginning of a new year, but how easy it is to play God, especially when we get a little theology under our belt. It's easy to think we got him figured out. I remember when Donald Gray Barnhouse up in Philadelphia used to stand before a simple microphone, a Bible in his hand, and he'd take questions from the audience, called it open forum. And his student up in the balcony stood up and said, Dr. Barnhouse, I've been wondering, how could the children of Israel be 40 years in the wilderness and the shoes never wear out and the clothes never wear out and they never went hungry? Dr. Barnhouse's answer was, God! He kind of had the voice of the fourth member of the Trinity, you know. God! The kid goes, oh, now I understand. Barnhouse said, no, you don't, son. Nobody understands. Isn't that great? Nobody understands. We got an old year that's passed. We got a new year coming. And if we're not careful, we'll follow our own rules. Look at verse 13. Here are our rules. Our rules. First, we choose our time, today or tomorrow. See, we're making plans. We got our day timer, or whatever form you use to help organize your life. So we choose our own time, today or tomorrow. Second, we select our location. We'll go to such and such a city. January, I'm going to be in Dallas. Come July, I'm going to be in Phoenix. Come September, hope to be, and you name that. We choose the location. We select the place we're going to be. Third, we limit our stay. See what it says? We'll spend a year there. So this guy's really got his life organized. And then we arrange our activities. We will engage in business. We even predict a profit. We will make a profit. It's all in verse 13. That's exactly what we do in unguarded moments. I do it when I'm not thinking more wisely. I set out a plan. I got the year in front of me. I love getting my book and going through January and February and March. I get all this thing I've done all the way through December, as if I'm going to live to see December. I don't know I will. Got it all planned out. Now understand, James is not criticizing good planning. He's not advocating being haphazard about our lives, being disorganized. Book of Proverbs, which I'm reading with one of our grandsons. Every day we're going through a chapter in the Proverbs. We're going to do it all year long. Here I go again. Maybe. We're going to go through it all year long. If I'm still around, if he's still around, what a thought. But Proverbs is talking about organizing your life. What he's addressing is demonstrating mistaken confidence. Stop that. Stop that kind of presumptuous living. In fact, look at the very next verse. You do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. Isn't that a remarkable thought? We planned out tomorrow, but we don't know what our life will be like tomorrow. I put together a few tomorrows. It's a Thursday. The date is April the 13th. The Secretary of War is Edwin Stanton. He's making plans in the White House for a celebration. Flowers have been ordered. Banners have been raised. The name, Ulysses S. Grant, Victor. It's going to be spread all over. The war, this terrible war between the states. Finally, the bloodshed is ending. They're going to celebrate. And then, in the words of Jay Winnick, then came the bullet that bore into his brain. 1865, April 14th. Good Friday. The president's assassinated. The day before, they didn't know a thing about that. Oh, they got the security all buttoned down. President's okay, safe. Thank God the newspapers are finally getting beyond the ugly criticism of this buffoon of an ape-like president, they called him. Now he's dead. Travel with me ahead over 75 years later. It's a Saturday afternoon, and a naval officer and his wife are, of all things, finishing the decorating of their little apartment as they're enjoying a wonderful tour of duty at Pearl Harbor. December 6th. We'll sleep in tomorrow morning. Got our apartment ready. This is going to be great. Wonderful night of romance together. And boom, the place comes apart the next day. Tomorrow, December 7, 1941, Sunday morning, when all hell broke loose. They never thought of that the day before. He didn't know what their life would be like tomorrow. You and I were not alive in that first tomorrow. Many of you weren't alive in the second I mentioned. Let me mention one where we all were. Monday Night Football. What a great game it was. Had a terrific time. The guys on the TV talked too much, so I had it on mute. Just enjoyed the game, Cynthia and I and two or three friends. We had over in our little home here in Dallas. September 10, 2001. And I'm eating a bowl of cereal on Tuesday morning in the kitchen, standing up, which is my style when I have breakfast. Not that I'm driven, but... And I click on the TV, it's still on mute. And I'm looking at what looks like a Bruce Willis movie. And I'm thinking, how in the world did they film that? I got a son at School of the Recording Arts down in Florida where they do these animations. And I'm thinking, well, he would know how they did that film. And all of a sudden, boom, a plane goes through the second tower. And I scream for Cynthia. And we call our kids. We couldn't get through to one of them. Inside for Living was at that time in a place called EDS, in temporary quarters as our building was being built. And boy, that place shut down. It looked like we were at war. We were. Tomorrow. Isn't that amazing? I mentioned a Thursday in a week. I mentioned a Saturday afternoon, and in an otherwise delightful week, I mentioned a Monday, where, by the way, I read later, 12 investors had met on the 101st floor saying, tomorrow morning we meet and carry out this plan. Come early. And they did. And they never got out of the South Tower. You do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. Nor do I. Suddenly it makes sense, doesn't it? Oh, James, writing way ahead of his time. Why, you're just a vapor. You're just a vapor. Shakespeare writes in Hamlet, Macbeth, he writes, if you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me. No wonder there's such a run on astrologists. Stupid game plan in life. Guide your life by the stars. They don't know either. But we long to know people who know tomorrow. I got a friend who lives in Santa Barbara Canyon. He said, Chuck, when the fire hit, it came like a 50-mile-an-hour flood of flames. He says, I looked up and I saw the smoke and I started making a list. I called my dog over and I got my dog next to me and I'm putting my list together. And I got out of there with a car, a dog, and my list. Lost everything else. You don't know what your life's going to be like tomorrow. So, what do we do? Let me give you some things to write down. I've said one of them over and over again, so you hopefully have put that down. You have no knowledge of what tomorrow holds. We have a church out in Frisco filled with people who didn't know what their year held. Before the year started, they didn't know that by the end of the year they'd be unemployed. Whole bunch of white-collar workers unemployed now. Not just white-collar workers. One lady didn't know she'd face serious surgery. When they cut her open, they just sewed her back up. It's inoperable. Healthy looking, attractive, a young grandmother. One family didn't know they'd lose the man of the house. 50-year-old pilot with Delta. Layover in Amsterdam. He and his co-pilot friend, flown together for years, went to school together. Decided on their layover, because you have to lay over to get your sleep back so you feel okay to fly back across the pond. And while they're in Amsterdam, this pilot friend of mine and the co-pilot they say to each other, let's go bike riding. Boom, hit by a bullet train, gone. Could hardly find their remains. The family didn't know they'd be without a man of the house. This isn't dramatic stuff where we made a movie out of. This is real stuff. I can give you names to every one of these people. It goes on. There was a family that discovered their 15-year-old son is now on drugs. At the top of his class. Got a drug problem he's kept secret for 2 years. He also been messing around with pornography. All that's come to light. The other side is we have a couple that thought they'd be single forever, and they've fallen in love with each other, and they can hardly wait to get married in April. They didn't even know each other at the beginning of last year. How exciting is that? I got a pastor friend who was at Schofield Memorial Church, and he's now in Fargo, North Dakota. Ah! And I'm driving along in my truck yesterday, and I hear in Fargo it's 37 below zero. I prayed for Matthew St. John. We have friends from that church, his friends that are from that church that were visiting our church a few Sundays ago, and they took my hand like they were about to pass out, and they said, pray for our new pastor. He has no idea what winter is like. I mean, we shut down schools when it gets to 20 in Dallas. 37 below zero. I could go on. You do not know. How about finances? How about finances? I would like to announce today that we're going to take that 200,000 surplus and give it to all the students. I would like to announce that. We're not going to do that, but I would like to announce that today. Yancey wrote this in the last page of the January 09 issue. Listen to this. As analysts began picking through the ruins of the financial collapse, they started dusting off old-fashioned words like greed, moderation, integrity, and trust. When executives line their pockets at the expense of employees and shareholders, when banks make speculative loans with little likelihood of payback, when borrowers walk away with good faith contracts and the system collapses. A functioning economy is held together by a thin web of trust. If you doubt that, visit a country where you have to pay bribes to get action, and you must count your change after every purchase. Then this. The same week that global wealth shrank by $7 trillion, Zimbabwe's inflation rate hit a record 231 million%. In other words, if you had saved $1 million Zimbabwean dollars on Monday, by Tuesday it's worth $1.58. You have no knowledge of what tomorrow will bring. Second, you have no assurance of a long life. I preached this many times before I ever let the text say what it's saying. And I found that pauses are worth more than words. You are just a vapor, appears for a little while, then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live. Pause. And if the Lord wills, we shall do this or that. You have no assurance of a long life. You see the word he uses to describe our lives? Vapor. Atmis, A-T-M-I-S in the Greek. We get our word atmosphere from it. Puff of smoke is the way one renders it. Another, a wisp of fog. All these hot shots running around three-piece suits looking like big deals. Driven around in limousines, think they got life by the tail. Their life is like a wisp of fog. I bury them earlier, younger now than ever in my ministry. I should have kept a record of the 40 and 50-year-olds I've buried in the last 2 years. It's remarkable. So, we have no assurance of a long life. So here's what we ought to say. If the Lord wills, not about my will, it's about his will. Not about the attorney who draws up a will for my life, it's about the Lord's will. If the Lord wills, we will live, meaning I don't have forever. And then we will do this or that. 3 very practical lessons, and I'm through. Number 1, there is a will we need to respect. Our Lord's will. Notice the name, Lord. I don't need to remind you of all that includes. Our Master. There is a will we need to respect. This, by the way, will guard us from pride. Constant problem we all fight, pride. If the Lord wills. Second, there is a destiny we need to remember. This will guard you from presumption. I say work hard. I say give it your best. These are the only few years you'll be at this place. Give it everything you've got. Grades will take care of themselves. Give it everything you've got. Because there's a destiny you need to remember. We're all going to wind up there. And it doesn't mean you run scared, okay? I was in the grocery store the other day. A very old lady was shopping next to me. And I listened to her. She kind of talking to herself. Or she had one of those ear deals and was talking to somebody. I've answered people in grocery stores. I reached over to get tomatoes one time and she said, no, I'm going. And she wasn't talking to me. She's talking to Frank somewhere on the phone. Anyway, this old lady talking to herself, picking among the bananas. No green ones. Don't want to get any green ones. She won't even buy green bananas. Don't live like that. You know, you're gonna probably make it to tomorrow. So there's a destiny we just need to be remembering. But here's the third and the last. There's a life we need to realize. And this will guard you from procrastination. For goodness sake, live. I love Jim Elliot's line, wherever you are, be all there. Live to the hilt, every situation you believe to be the will of God. Live it. Don't put it off. Live it. It's a wonderful way to conduct your life. And so much more to do than helium balloons on a lawn chair. Because I'm going to tell you, if you don't, you'll regret it. My brother-in-law opened the bottom drawer of my sister's bureau and lifted out a tissue-wrapped package. This, he said to me, this is not a slip. This is lingerie. He discarded the tissue and handed me the slip. It was exquisite silk, handmade, trimmed with a cobweb of lace. The price tag with an astronomical figure still on it, still attached. Jan bought this the first time we went to New York, at least 8 or 9 years ago, but she never wore it. She was saving it for a special occasion. Well, I guess this is the occasion. He took the lovely slip from me and put it on the bed with the other clothes we were taking to the mortician. His hands lingered on the soft material for a moment, then he slammed the drawer shut. Stood there and then said, don't ever save anything for a special occasion. Every day you're alive is a special occasion. I remembered those words through the funeral and the days that followed, when I helped him and my niece attend to all the sad chores that followed an unexpected death. I thought about them on the plane ride returning home from the Midwestern town where my sister's family still lives. I thought about all the things she hadn't seen or heard or done. Thought about the things that she had done without realizing they were all special. I'm still thinking about his words to me, and they've changed my life. I'm not saving anything now. We use our good china and crystal for every special event, such as losing a pound, getting a sink unstopped, the first camellia blossom in spring. Someday, and one of these days are losing their grip on my vocabulary. If it's worth seeing or hearing or doing, I want to see and hear and do it now. Now. I'm trying very hard not to put off, hold back, or save anything that would add laughter and luster to my and our lives. And every morning when I open my eyes, I tell myself, this is a special day. Father, thank you for perspective that only you give at times like this. You have an amazing way of never decreasing our joy, but reminding us of the brevity of life and the necessity of living it. Thank you for the warnings against pride and presumption, against procrastination. Help me to live this better than I could ever preach it. Thank you for the year. By your grace, we'll live it. And if it's in your will, we'll see the end of it. Thank you that it's well with our souls because of Christ. In his name we pray. Everybody sit.
It was in the fall semester of 1959 that I sat where you're sitting and listened to several messages from the now late Dr. Alan Redpath. He was then pastor of the Moody Church up in Chicago. I don't remember much of what he said. He did a brief sort of mini-series on the life of David. But right in the middle of the series, he made a statement that I'll never forget. And I've often quoted it. The conversion of a soul is the miracle of a moment. The making of a saint is the task of a lifetime. All of us, by God's grace, have been converted to Christ. Our stories are all different, but the object of our affection and the subject of our praise remains the same: Christ, who loved us and gave himself for us. And as a result, he has begun a work in us to make us, as Dr. Pentecost prayed, conform to his image. In the unfolding of God's plan for each one of us, we have been led to this school for a period of time. The time is brief and will seem all the more brief as your years stack up. During the time you're here, it will seem like an eternity. However, after it's over, you will look back and wish you had had more years. That many of you are greatly gifted, and you are certainly going to be used by God's grace in unique ways here at home and some of you worldwide. And therefore, I want to talk about a part of the preparation of your training that is rarely addressed. I can count on probably both hands with fingers left over the messages I've heard talking about the importance of this subject. We sing about it, but we don't usually go there. When we are there, we often resist it, and only through God's persistent working, holding us there, do we glean the benefits of it. Every woman and man sitting on this platform has known what I'm talking about, and some of you already have. During your years at seminary, these words I share will take on new meaning for you, because though gifted and perhaps already having been used by God in some part of his work, you're now set aside for a period of training. I call it the necessity of obscurity. You are entering into a time of deep soul searching, admittedly academic training, but more importantly, personal rearrangement of your life and lifestyle. During this period, you will not be well known, you will not feel greatly used, and you will at times feel frustrated because the passion to serve Christ will at times be overwhelming. You'll be tempted to quit early. You'll want to rush out into the scene where the needs are evident in the real world. And if you're not careful, you will cut short this important period that God has called you to be obscure, to be quiet, to be still, to learn by listening and studying, to reform habits, or perhaps for the first time in your life, to form habits of discipline in the private part of your world. And I want to urge you to stay there, especially during your years here. And as your ministry begins to unfold, I want to emphasize the value of being quiet, still, alone. It was Richard Foster who wrote in his book, Celebration of Discipline, "Superficiality is the curse of our age. The doctrine of instant satisfaction is a primary spiritual problem. The desperate need today is not for greater numbers of intelligent people or gifted people, but for deep people." For most of you, you will go deeper here than you have ever gone in your life. And this is just the beginning. My exhortation today is go there. Take time to get deeper. My thoughts germinate from the first chapter of the letter to the Galatians, written by a man who was taken there by God for some 3 years before he ever stepped into the fast lane. I'm not saying that Paul had been removed from life until now. I'm saying he had been operating in the flesh up until his conversion. Active, look at verse 10, chapter 1. According to his own testimony, he was still trying to please men. I love this verse. I've returned to it many times. Am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I striving to please others? If I were still, please note the word still, because it was his lifestyle before conversion. If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. So he's busy about pleasing people in his lost estate. He's studied. He's now hit the road full force, coming against Christians, persecuting them, hoping for many of them death. He is engaged in the wrong direction. Notice also verse 13. You have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries. He is engaged. He is active. He's pursuing the goal of putting an end to this sect that's getting a foothold in his country. In fact, he says beyond his own contemporaries. He was moving ahead and moving up. His name became a household word among his peers. being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. I read in that a lot of energy, an enormous amount of effort. This was my goal in life. And then the Damascus Road conversion, the miracle of a moment. Struck down and blinded by the light, and left blind, winding up in an obscure place. He is now facing an enormous rearrangement of his private world. Some of you understand conversions like that. That's your story. Others of you can't remember when you weren't in the family of God, reared in a Christian home, taught and nurtured and mentored by parents and pastors and teachers and youth workers and friends. You've been brought up in all of this. But it may very well be that you've not gone deeper. You've been active, and you certainly are driven with the goal of ministry, or you wouldn't have requested admission to the school. Now's the time to slow down, pull back, go deep. Now's your chance. In fact, Acts 9:16, the words of the Lord himself to Ananias, saying, I'm going to show Paul all that he must suffer for my name's sake. It's a part of the plan that is not mentioned that often. Part of my plan for Paul is his suffering. It was Tozer who said, it's doubtful God can use anyone greatly till he has hurt him deeply. Part of going deeper is the hurt, the pain, the hardship, the difficulties. And for many of you, they will begin at this school. It doesn't mean you're on the wrong track. It means you are right in the nucleus of his will, and it's part of his plan to drive you deeper. But Paul did something deliberate. He tells us in verse 16 first what he did not do, and then he tells us later what he did do. It's what he did do that interests me and I'm fascinated by. He was pleased by his grace, verse 16, to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood. Well, that's new and different. This man who has been pleasing people and doing what others expected him to do, admired by his contemporaries and no doubt by now quoted by those who spoke of a man energized with the right goals for those in Judaism. Now he says, I did not seek that walk any longer. I didn't go immediately to Jerusalem, though there were those there who could have taught me. I didn't go there. I didn't go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, verse 17. But, don't miss, verse 16, I did not. Verse 17, nor did I, in the middle of the verse, but I went away to Arabia. Bishop J.B. Lightfoot, a reputable scholar, writes, a veil of thick darkness hangs over St. Paul's visit to Arabia. Others have commented on the visit to Arabia. Charles Ryrie. In Arabia, he was alone with God, thinking through the implications of his encounter with the risen Christ on the Damascus Road. William Hendrickson. Withdrawing to Arabia for rest, prayer, and meditation was exactly what Paul needed, so that his mind, violently shaken, would have time and opportunity to ponder the implications of the words which the Lord had spoken to him at the moment of his unforgettable experience, referring to his conversion. James Montgomery Boyce. The replacement of his Jewish world and life view by a Christian theology would have been the work of more than a long weekend. Paul went into Arabia to think, to study, rather than to preach. Unlike Chrysostom's comment, who said he went as a missionary to evangelize a barbarous and savage people. No, in a rare occasion, I disagree with Chrysostom on that. John Stott. He went into Arabia for quiet and solitude. He seems to have stayed there for 3 years, verse 18. In this period of withdrawal, as he meditated on the Old Testament scriptures, on the facts of the life and death of Jesus that he already knew, and on his experience of conversion. The gospel of the grace of God was revealed to him there in its fullness. Now he had Jesus to himself, as it were, for 3 years of solitude in the wilderness. And so do you. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 or more. I'll never forget when I handed a diploma for a PhD to one of our graduates, white hair sticking out under his cap as he pulled it off to be hooded at commencement. And as I usually did with those PhD grads, I not only shook his hand, I embraced him, and he whispered, 14 long years. To go deeper. To go deeper. Go there. This is your Arabia. All kinds of strange things will occur, most of which you would never predict or even anticipate. You will be tested as never before. You will be knocked down, discouraged, disappointed. It's all part of the making of a saint for a lifetime of ministry. Don't fight it. Go there. Stay there. Paul deliberately went away to Arabia and returned once more. Arabia. It's hard to nail down exactly where he was. In the back of your Bible, there are maps. One of mine is marked The Spread of Christianity. It's the last in the section of maps in my Bible. In the far right-hand corner in the bottom, you will see Arabian desert, bordered on the west by the Red Sea, on the east by the Persian Gulf, and the northernmost part, you will notice it reaches almost to Damascus. That's interesting. And it goes south down to the Sinai Peninsula. Some have said he just left Damascus a bit and went into the northernmost region. I don't know how they know that. It doesn't say that, but you know how those things are. We do know why he was there, and that was to be quiet, to be obscure, to learn obedience. He lived the life of an Essene, not unlike John the Baptizer. I don't think he was busy handing out tracts, though I believe his zeal for the lost intensified. I believe he may have lived for a while with Bedouins. I know this, he was away from home, and there were not the comforts of what he had known as familiar. Before, he was busy and active and engaged and advancing and zealous and passionate. Now he's quiet, deliberately quiet, going deeper. He's converted, but he is brand new to the Christian family. Those who knew him and knew of him were those confident that persecution was the plan that ought to be followed. Christians were afraid of him. The disciples were reluctant to take him in. Had it not been for Barnabas, who knows how long it would have taken for him to join their circle. But here is Arabia. A couple of simple statements from God's word, and then we'll apply it as I conclude. Isaiah 30, verse 15. In quietness and trust is your strength. Be quiet and trust. Be quiet and trust. I learn virtually nothing while I'm talking. I learn when I listen. As my dad used to say, that's why you were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, son. Listen. Don't speak too quickly. Be quiet. Trust. Go deeper. That's why you're here. And you'll never be here again. God is at work now. Ecclesiastes 7:29, listen to this. God made us plain and simple, but we have made ourselves very complicated. Today's English version. Thomas Kelly's words come to mind. God never guides us to an intolerable scramble of panting feverishness. So what's the solution? A complete makeover of your spiritual life. Complete. These men and women who will teach are committed to that happening. They are carefully chosen, experienced, interested, not just scholars. They are women and men of heart. They understand the stuff of ministry. Listen to them. Learn in your Arabia. Go deep. Don't apologize for it. Let it happen. You have capacities you have never tapped. And so I close with 4 practical exhortations. First, during your years at Dallas Seminary, instead of speeding up, slow down. Instead of speeding up, slow down and rethink. Don't miss your own life in the process of rethinking your theology, rethinking ministry, rethinking a philosophy for ministry. Slow down and rethink. Takes time, takes solitude, takes quietness. Second, instead of talking more, be quiet and reflect. Let things roll over in your mind. Begin a lifetime of questioning. Probe the text with questions. Probe answers with more questions. Get as close as you can to as many of these men and women as you can possibly have time for. Listen. Third, be still and release. The hidden preparation time is a time of releasing. Release the worries. Release concerns about where you're going to be and what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. It's all arranged. God's got it put together. He just has to get you right where He wants you. Fourth and finally, Be real. Be real. Look into the mirror of your soul and see what is really there. Those things that have you not been addressed, address them. Be real and open to change. I was greatly encouraged when I read from Howard Taylor's work on his father. Hudson Taylor knew the testing that tempers the steel of the soul. Invalided home at 29 after 6 years of intensive service in China, he settled with his little family in the East End of London. Now listen. Outside interests lessened. Friends began to forget. 5 long, hidden years were spent in the dreary streets of a poor part of London, where the Taylors were shut up to prayer and patience. From the record of those years, it has been written, and now he quotes his father, without those hidden years, with all their growth and testing, how could the vision and enthusiasm of youth have been matured for the leadership that was to be? And his son adds faith, faithfulness, devotion, self-sacrifice, unremitting labor, patient, persevering prayer became their portion and power, but more. There is the deep, prolonged exercise of a soul following hard after God. The gradual strengthening here of a man called to walk by faith, not by sight. The unutterable confidence of a heart cleaving to God and God alone. As the years of obscurity progressed, prayer was the only way by which the burdened heart could obtain any relief. And when the discipline was complete, there emerged the China Inland Mission, at first only a tiny root, but destined of God to fill the land of China with gospel fruit. The conversion of a soul is the miracle of a moment, the making of a saint. It starts right here, the beginning of a lifetime. Be still and learn that God is God. Bow with me, please. I thank you, Father, for the things you have taught me through the years, most of which began right in this room and in these halls, and from some of these very men on this platform. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your grace. Now I ask that for your new generation of men and women who will fill the ranks in the years to come. Quiet their hearts, deepen them, and then use them mightily. In the name of Jesus. Everybody said.